In these sessions, we're going to talk about enrichment, that is, the mental processes that audiences use to begin to clarify meaning. I want to begin with a quote that apparently comes from the Churchtown Parish magazine, somewhere in the UK, and sent in to the BBC News Quiz comedy show. It said this: "Would the congregation please note that the bowl at the back of the church labelled 'for the sick' is for monetary donations only." Why is this humorous for British people? I'm imagining a bowl that looks something like this. And the problem is, in British English, the words "the sick" can have at least two different meanings. It could refer to people who are unwell, or it could refer to vomit, so that the label "for the sick" on the bowl could potentially be communicating this is where to put things for unwell people, or this is something to vomit into. The extract here from the magazine could make it look like the authors want you to be clear it is the former and not the latter use that's intended. This is a humorous example, but it highlights some of the processes that are going on all the time in our minds as we try to make sense of communication. What happens is that we infer meaning from the words that people use, and very often we get the meaning that they intended. Usually we only notice problems when we infer the wrong meaning and communication fails. Actually, this extract itself may fail to communicate meaning if you're a speaker of American English, because there, sick cannot mean vomit, so there's no ambiguity, and there's nothing funny about this sentence at all, which was the whole point of it being sent to the BBC. What we're going to do in this set of videos is to try and explain what is going on in our minds when we communicate with others. We're going to look at that both from the perspective of communicators and of audiences. What we're going to be using is a model of communication called relevance theory that was developed by Deirdre Wilson and Dan Sperber. To begin with, I want to introduce some terminology. Relevance theory uses two key words to talk about the process of communication. It says that purposeful communication is both ostensive and inferential. Saying that communication is ostensive means that the speaker is intending to communicate something. He gives clues to what that something might be. It's really important that the communicator doesn't give an exact code. Rather, he creates, or she creates, signposts that they're going to hope that the audience will be able to work out what they intended. Let's take an example from the area of non-verbal communication. If we're in a meeting and at some point through the meeting I look down at my watch very deliberately, I'm giving you an ostensive clue to say I think we need to end this meeting soon. In our example about the bowl in church, the person who wrote the label chose the signpost "for the sick." In British English, this could be referring to vomit or to ill people. But by choosing to use the definite article "the," he's given a fairly clear pointer that he is talking about sick people. However, there's another possible miscommunication here. Is it the bowl itself that is to be given to the sick? Or is it the contents that people put into the bowl? Either interpretation is possible, but the writer is relying on the reader to infer the correct meaning in this context, that it is the contents of the bowl and not the bowl itself. So this takes us to our second key point about communication. As well as being ostensive, with the communicator giving clues to the meaning, communication is also inferential. This is looking at it from the audience perspective and saying audiences infer or guess the intended meaning from the signpost that they see. And they make those guesses based on what is most relevant to them. Although our sign saying "for the sick" could potentially mean that it is for collecting vomit, or that it is a bowl itself to give to some sick people, the author hoped that most people who saw it would infer correctly that they should put something into the bowl in order for it to be distributed to sick people. That would be the most relevant interpretation for someone walking into a British church who understands the context of how churches make collections to support the poor and needy. The main point here is that the words themselves, "for the sick," which we may call the ostensive stimulus, do not determine the meaning. Rather, we can say that the utterance underdetermines the meaning. It just gives enough clues for the hearer to hopefully fill out what was intended. The meaning is therefore inferred in the mind of the hearer or reader rather than just being decoded. This is how Sperber and Wilson describe this feature that they call linguistic underdeterminacy in their original book on relevance theory. They say, all that's required is that the properties of the ostensive stimulus should set the inferential process on the right track. To do this, they need not represent or encode the communicator's informative intention in any great detail. That is, how do we communicate? We don't typically say everything we mean. Rather, we under-encode what we want to communicate and leave it to others to work it out. The hearer has to enrich what we have said in order to clarify it. This is actually a fairly complex process, and we're doing it all the time when we're communicating with others. However, just like the complicated things that go inside the engine of our car, we don't really think about them until they go wrong. Similarly with communication, one of the best ways to explore how communication actually works is to study those cases where we miscommunicate and see what was it that happened. Perhaps you could do that. Think about a time when you didn't communicate clearly what you intended, or when you misunderstood what someone else was intending to communicate. Can you explain it through the way the communicator under-encoded what they were trying to say? Or can you think about it in terms of how the hearer didn't enrich it in the way the speaker intended? Also, it can be helpful to start a diary while you're watching these videos and note down miscommunication examples. Then you can try to explain them using the concepts that we're covering. In the next few videos, we're going to look at the main categories of ways that audiences enrich utterances to clarify what the communicator was intending to communicate. Briefly, these involve ambiguity, where a word or structure has two or more meanings. Also vagueness, where a word has a range of meaning. Then we're going to look at ellipsis, where words are omitted syntactically. And finally, we're going to look at reference, what a word or phrase is referring to. We will start covering these in more detail in the next session on ambiguity.